Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Empire Soccer Report. It's episode 6 of this new venture. The New York Red Bull, Red Bull New York, are well in their way through their preseason ahead of 2026. Michael Bradley is at the wheel, and I'm joined by a new guest. You might know him if you follow RBNY Season on Instagram, or if you've listened to the Unfiltered podcast. It's Zach Feldman. I had the privilege of being on his show a couple weeks ago, so happy to have you here, Zach. Just listen to the latest episode of Unfiltered. I believe you've added Aiden of All Red Bulls in as a permanent co-host. So excited to have you on. Zach, how's it going?
Going pretty well. It's been a busy couple of weeks for me personally, and for the Red Bulls too. So, had a lot to get through on my show, the last show. Personally for the show itself, obviously, and for the club with all the latest transfers. I went a little bit without recording a podcast, so I had to do some catching up. But I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on, and for returning the favor as well. I'm looking forward to digging into all the latest Red Bulls news with you as well.
Yeah, some preseason matches we've got to chat about, some more roster moves, and we don't think that's going to be the last before the season kicks off properly on February the 21st on the road against Orlando City. But before we get into it, tell us a little bit about yourself, Zach. You created RBNY Season. More recently, you've created the Unfiltered podcast. You've been a fan of the club for quite some time. Just tell us how you got into all that and what you've been doing covering the Red Bulls.
Yeah, so my story is actually pretty unique, at least I would say. I have like very little recollection of my early days of supporting the club. All I remember is that when I was a kid, my dad and my brother used to go to the Red Bulls games. I was around 8 years old back in like 2015, 2016 when I started to like have an actual recollection of the games I was going to. Like I recall a game against Houston where Felipe scored a really great free kick.
Oh,
But when
I know that one.
but when I really started to get into the Red Bulls and start to really cover the team was around COVID. Obviously, we were all locked indoors and we had nothing much to do. So I thought my calling was to just start making content for the Red Bulls and to start getting really into it. So I started up RBNY Season, and yeah, it's been 6 years since that started, and it's just crazy the growth. I grew it to over 1,000 followers, which is just surreal every time I look at that. And yeah, the Unfiltered podcast has been going well. I'm continuously growing and getting more comfortable in this space within, the media, sports media, and the Red Bulls as a whole. So it's great to be able to have this opportunity to come on your show, just like it was great to have you on mine. And yeah, so I would say that. Again, like I said, it's a unique story, but I think I've had a great opportunity to grow and continue to learn more about the Red Bulls as the years have gone on.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing what you know about the club. Folks, if you don't follow RBNY Season on Instagram, it's 1,000 and growing. Join it before, so you can say that you were on the early days before it really kicks up. And if you haven't listened to Unfiltered, listen to it. The latest episode included a great interview with Fabian Renkel of Kickbase. I really enjoyed that one, Zach. Let's talk about the Red Bulls because, as you mentioned, there is quite a bit going on. First and foremost, they played in their first match of the Torneo de Tejas. Lord knows the Red Bulls love a preseason tournament, but not so much this time around. They really struggled in this one, went down 3-0 before the 90 minutes were over. They played an additional 45 minutes of free soccer where they actually looked the strongest they did all day and scored 2 goals, but they end up losing 3-2. FC Dallas is saying it was 3-0. We'll go with both. It doesn't really matter. It is preseason. There was a red card, and they didn't even go down to 10 men, but we'll talk about all that. Primarily, I want to start off that it looked like a very strong starting 11 used by Michael Bradley. As far as we can tell, that 4-3-3, that's kind of becoming the uniform for Red Bull, thanks to Jurgen Klopp. But the back line, I think, is where we're going to start our conversation. Dennis Yengor starts at right back. Justin Che, a natural right back, playing at center back again. Robbie Volader and Omar Valencia rounds out that back four. And they were taken advantage of in that first half, specifically. Balls over the top really seemed to undo them. The first goal scored by Logan Farrington, who's having a great preseason for FC Dallas. The second by Anderson Julio. Ethan Horvath kind of left out to dry in both scenarios. Maybe he could have done better on the first. And then on the second, I guess Robbie Volader thought that was going to be offside and didn't really do his best in tracking back. It's going to be center back by committee for the start of the season. We know that. We expect the Red Bulls to be looking for at least one more center back in this transfer window before the season starts, but not the best of the opening half, at least for Red Bull New York there, Zach. What'd you take away from the game?
Yeah, definitely a little bit concerning, especially considering we saw this theme in preseason last year too. Especially in I forget who it was against, but there was one game where we really struggled. I think it was it was San Diego,
San
right?
Diego and
San
RSL,
Diego
they
where
didn't look great either.
yeah, but against San Diego, we were really, really exposed. Conceded 6 goals. But again, you don't really take that much away from preseason. You just kind of it's a way for the players to get warm and get minutes in the legs. This was a concerning game for sure, but it was also, in my opinion, not our strongest back line. For me personally, I would have Justin Shea on the right hand side and probably Dylan Nealis slide into center back because I think he's a little bit more comfortable in that role. But still, I mean, the way those goals were scored, I mean, the first one you could have argued maybe it was a good ball over the top. The second one, way too much space for Anderson Julio to run him behind, and I don't know if there's really any excusing that. Under Bradley last year, Red Bull 2 were at times a little bit vulnerable defensively. There was one game where they conceded 9 goals, which was a record for MLS Next Pro against Chicago. So, maybe that's just going to be an issue all throughout the season. I don't know. Bradley's a rookie coach to this league, so that's another thing where maybe, it might be a little bit of a concern, but at the end of the day, they did a lot better in those other 2 preseason games against Hartford and St. Louis. Maybe against St. Louis they had Ayla, so that was something. But against Hartford, that was a strong team, and they proved it. I would love to know what Jorge Rubalcaba did to get a red card, to be honest with you, because to get a red in preseason, you must have done something pretty bad. But yeah, I mean, funky rules for the Torneo de Tejas. I know Atlanta and Houston went to penalties. They didn't even count that as a draw. And I've known all throughout preseason, really, with all these games, they've gone the extra 30 or 45 minutes or whatever it is. So a lot of these preseason games are just ways for the players to get extra minutes in the legs. So I could make the case certainly that there's really not much to take away other than the fact that the defense was a little bit vulnerable.
So obviously this match wasn't streamed, wasn't televised. It was attendable for FC Dallas season ticket holders, I believe, and some media members. From what I've read on write-ups from FC Dallas media members, thank you to them for covering the match in this way, is that Red Bull actually controlled the bulk of possession. Their pressure was intimidating and posing on FC Dallas, but that counterattack really took advantage of what was a weak defensive performance from the Red Bulls, and they would add a third in the 80th minute. On a penalty, Logan Farrington scored it. Omar Valencia committed the foul on a late challenge. And Ethan Horvath got a hand to the penalty but couldn't keep it out. Of course, we know him well for saving that penalty in the 2021 Nations League final against Mexico. But then New York really kicked it into overdrive in that extra 45-minute period where Julian Hall scored his second of preseason and Andy Rojas scored his second of preseason. So good to see some youngsters getting on the board if there's any positives to take away from the match. Another negative, though, Emil Forsberg denied from the penalty spot the first time he's ever missed a penalty in a Red Bull shirt. Good thing for him and the club that it doesn't count. It is preseason. So ultimately 3-0, 3-2 loss, whatever it might be. And interestingly as well, a early dismissal for Jorge Rubalcaba in what was his unofficial debut. I don't know what he did to get a red card either, Zach, but 57 minutes and goodbye. And then they didn't even go down to 10 minutes. So, a funky experience, but good that they're getting some minutes under their legs and getting their way through the preseason. Their next match is going to be on Wednesday against Atlanta United. I believe that one kicks off at 2 p.m. or maybe noon. I might have that backwards. And then on Saturday, they play the Houston Dynamo to round out their preseason schedule. Following that, they open up the season on the 21st against Orlando City. We expect this squad to change at least a little bit in the next few days. The latest news is that until this point, the longest tenured member of Red Bull New York, Ricky Carmona, was traded to CF Montreal for fullback, wingback Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy. The Canadian international, 21 years old, swapped for Wiki Carmona. It's another piece added to this back line. I think it could cement either Justin Che or Dylan Nealis as more primary center backs now, as it's another person on the fullback position. I mean, there's a number of things that this move could mean. I think it means that Dennis Yengor or Juan Mina could have a smaller role on the fullback position. And it's also interesting. Michael Bradley has played with Jaquil Marshall-Rutty at Toronto FC. He's played with Raheem Edwards at Toronto FC, and he played a couple times on the national team with Ethan Horvath. So that's three players under his command, so to speak, that he's actually played alongside. So there's a few interesting things about this move. Carmona leaving, a player who was long scapegoated as one of the worst on this Red Bulls team, specifically from last year. He started in every single match and did not score a single goal in MLS play. Of course, he had that stunner against Philadelphia Union in the Open Cup, but an underwhelming time at Red Bull, considering that, you could tell with Wiki Carmona, there was a talented footballer in there, just couldn't always make it translate to goals and assists when it mattered for the club, Zach. So what's your takeaway from making this trade? It's the first one-for-one trade the Red Bulls have made since, I believe, 2018. So a lot to unpack there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'll start off with Wiki Carmona. Look, as you pointed out, he was scapegoated for a very, very long time. I think the reason for that was Red Bulls fans knew deep down that there was a player in there. I mean, he had an incredible left foot on him, and he showed it, once every about 500 shots, but he didn't show it every once in a while. So, that's the most frustrating part about Wiki Carmona for me is there was always a sense that he had more than he gave us. And especially last season, I mean, I pointed this out as well on X, right? He played every single match in MLS last season, and he, I think, featured in every MLS game dating back to 2024. And I think he had maybe one MLS goal to show for it, or even zero. So just such a frustrating player. But I do think that I think he'll do well in Montreal. I think he's well suited to their system. They play kind of a five back with two tens, I think. So he'll fit in well there. They have some talented players over in Montreal. They're definitely looking to rebuild off last season where they were one of the worst teams in MLS. But now on Marshall-Rutty, I think that is a really good piece of business. I've seen a lot of Montreal fans say otherwise, and kind of happy to see the back of him, but I think that's more so because he was a Toronto native who never really fit in with Montreal. He did pretty well at Charlotte last year. He got, I think, four assists from left back, so he'll add some much needed depth. I think on both sides of the fullback position, really left back and right back. He can play either side. He'll give some competition to Nealis or Che, whoever ends up being over on that right side, and Yengar and Mina as well. So there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of depth at left back now too, with Valencia, Edwards, and Marshall-Rutty, and Dos Santos coming in the future. So it's a good piece of business. It's a good pickup, especially in exchange for a player who I really don't think flattered at all. And the most impressive thing from a business standpoint is that they're not paying his whole salary. Montreal's still paying a part of his salary. Montreal, the Red Bulls also retain some sell-on value for Wiki Carmona, which is always nice. So I think they really got the better end of this deal here, despite what Montreal fans may imply about Marshall-Rutty's ability, which I think is a little bit, exaggerated at times.
Yeah, and we'll see if Red Bull can get anything off a sell-on clause for Wiki Carmona. I have my doubts about whether or not that he'll be a player that's sold for profit down the line. But it is a good piece of business, like you said. I mean, de Guzman continues to offload players that, just don't fit in for this moment with the club. I mean, bigger names than some, but when your team doesn't make the playoffs, you got to make change. And this is their way of doing it. On the Seeing Red podcast, Joe Pantorno of AM New York said that this is kind of the way of doing a rebuild without actually rebuilding, without actually using that dreaded term, is word for word what he said. And I think that's a perfect way to put this, because let's face it, people had been asking for a change in direction for quite some time with this club. But if you always sneak into the playoffs and, always give yourself a chance to win a trophy, it's hard to say things don't work. Well, last year it didn't work, and now they have to go in a different direction. And I still don't think they've put all the pieces together yet. It's still going to be a trial run. And I also don't believe they're going to let Michael Bradley fail. They're going to let him have the pieces that he wants to develop, and it's going to be a work in progress. It may not all be perfectly polished in 2026, but this is a project for the future and for the present as well. So, Wiki Carmona, Red Bulls fans should thank him for his service, even if it was frustrating at times. I do think it's the right business being made. One thing it does kind of leave is maybe now a bit thinness in midfield, because we've talked about the thinness at center back. At least they have players can cover that area in Che, in Nealis, in Edwards even. But as for the midfield, it looked like Carmona was going to be the first or maybe second player off the bench behind the eight, or if you want to count Forsberg as a 10. But now it looks like it's after Ronald Donkor and Gustav Berggren, uh, it's really just Mehmeti, Benedetti, and maybe Aiden Jarvis, who I don't believe traveled with the team to Texas. So I think they might have to start looking around for another player in midfield. Nate Worth is a candidate potentially to receive a homegrown contract. He was excellent for Red Bulls too. We'll see what that looks like. But I don't think that would happen until maybe mid-season at the earliest. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you think that they should also be, if they're looking for a center back, which I believe they should do, should they also look for another depth piece in central midfield?
Yeah, I think that they're very high, obviously, on Audrey Mehmeti, who is a real talent, and we saw that throughout the playoffs last year. And it was actually pointed out in the highlights that we saw how commanding Audrey Mehmeti was on that penalty with Ethan Horvath. He was the one that was going over to Horvath and I guess instructing him or kind of making him feel comfortable in his ability to save the penalty in a way, which is really telling to me. But he's still not proven, and he's not a proven commodity. The only proven midfielders that you have, with the exception of the number 10 with Emil Forsberg, are Ronald Donkor and Gustav Berggren. That's not enough for a team that wants to be very competitive in MLS next season. Now, I like Donkor, I like Berggren, but you have no options off the bench really who are proven MLS commodities or proven commodities somewhere in European football. So absolutely, I would like to see them bring in another midfielder. Will they? I don't know if they will before the season starts. I think their priority is probably a center back, as Joe Pantorno pointed out with a little nugget in his article after Ayla left. But, I think they're very light in midfield, and I think they could absolutely do with another addition in that position. But we'll see what happens. Certainly, I know that they view Mehmeti pretty highly, but I have my doubts as to whether or not he's ready for a huge role this season.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think Mehmeti is a remarkable young talent. We've seen Red Bull integrate young talent like him before. The most glaring comparison is, of course, Tyler Adams. Mehmeti, that's big shoes to fill. It's a big bill to live up to. But he was certainly capable with Red Bulls too. This is not exactly verified, but we believe he's the youngest professional captain to ever win a professional league ever at 16 years old. So, I mean, that's just sensational. And it's a player that you got to expect will factor into the team sooner rather than later. We just don't know how big that factor will be. They're really thin in the center of the pitch, not including the goalkeeper position. From the forward position to the midfield to the center of defense, things are looking a little bit light. And I say that at the striker position because while there are a number of bodies there that can fill in, one player seems to be on the way out. Wiktor Bogacz looks like he's going to be on loan to the Ekstraklasa's Cracovia. The Polish native could be heading back to Poland. He is not with the team in Texas at the moment. It's been reported that he was supposed to travel into Poland last week, although we haven't heard much news on that front most recently, although I believe it is expected that that deal is going to get done. Bogacz really came in unfit, a player who was linked with some big clubs in Europe, namely Juventus. Red Bull beat them out for his signature, and he felt like the type of striker that has a similar profile to Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting, was going to be a good player to learn underneath Choupo, but didn't really pan out so much. He scored one goal and looked a little bit out of place at times with his team, I would say. Going back to Poland, I think makes sense for him. After a year-long loan, maybe we'll see what it looks like for him in 2027. Could he return to Red Bull? I don't know. But it looks like that deal, what we haven't heard a lot about in the last few days, is almost done. It leaves Julian Hall, Rold Mitchell, and Tanner Rossborough as the depth behind Choupo-Moting. We saw Mitchell get his first minutes of preseason at the end against Dallas, and he was excellent for Red Bulls too in their run to MLS Next Cup Pro. So MLS Next Pro Cup, excuse me. It's always a mouthful. So Your thoughts on the Bogacz potential departure and what that could mean for the striker position behind Chupo?
Yeah, look, even with Bogacz, the striker depth was pretty light and pretty young as well.
Yep.
So on that in that regard, I don't mind Bogacz leaving because I think considering the money and the resources spent to bring him in, and the fact that his acquisition spanned across two windows in terms of the Red Bulls chasing him down, and when they did eventually get him in, he really did not live up to the hype. One goal and one assist in 25 appearances last season, not good enough whatsoever. It opens up a U22 spot, this move, as well as the move with Ayla, which means we have
Hmm.
two open U22 slots. We have another open international spot now as well. So I like that from a roster standpoint. I also, from his perspective, think a loan is pretty beneficial in terms of his development. I think being back in Poland, especially in the top division now, as opposed to the second tier where we signed him from, I think that could really help him. But yeah, I don't really think he was good enough per se to stick around with the Red Bulls. So another good move from De Guzman in an offseason where I think every single departure I could justify and I can say, yeah, that was a good move from a financial and from a business perspective and from a roster building standpoint. This is another really good one for me.
And I think it's also maybe the impetus of de Guzman here is to say we want to see Julian Hall take a jump. We want to see Rold Mitchell take a jump here. Um, Hall is a player who has been linked with clubs as big as Barcelona. He has been, the subject of a lot of attention, signing a contract at 15, scoring a goal at 16, and being in and around the first team. And, he wasn't even part of that playoff run for Red Bulls too. He's a full-fledged member of the Red Bulls first team. So I guess the expectation for him is, can he be that academy player who takes a jump in this striker position? I think it's going to be a big season for Julian Hall's development. I think for me on paper, he is the second striker behind Choupo-Moting. When the Red Bulls need a goal in a match in this coming season, their first guy off the bench might be the youngster Julian Hall. And I think we maybe haven't seen, I don't want to say a regression in his development, but we certainly haven't seen the coming out party that you might have expected from him having gotten those chances at an early age. Now, I believe he's going to turn 18 through this season, the 2008 born striker. Oftentimes used as a winger, but I think more traditionally a center forward now. And they've got, Lord knows, they've got depth on the wings with Rubalcaba, Cowell, Harper when he's healthy, Sofo, Rojas, Mosquera. And even though he didn't travel with the team to Texas, technically Serge Goma is still in that group of players as well. So I think this could be a big year for Hall. I think Mitchell showed his value with Red Bulls too, and then Rossborough, another body to fill in that role. What are your thoughts on the potential for Julian Hall to take a big jump? And do you think we see maybe a lot of even Rold Mitchell in this role?
Yeah, I think both of them have the potential to make that jump this season, especially Julian Hall. We thought that was going to be the case last year. It wasn't really. He didn't take as big of a jump as we kind of hoped. Sancho often shifted him into more of a deeper role in the midfield or even as a false nine. So with the potential now that he can really focus on being a out and out number nine, an out and out center forward with better support as well on the wings and through the middle with Emil Forsberg, Rubalcaba, and Cade Cowell. I think Julian Hall can absolutely make that jump this year. And I think, we've seen throughout preseason, he scored one or two goals, I think it's set.
He's got two.
He's got two. So, he's been developing nicely in preseason. It was good to see Rold Mitchell get minutes as well. I really liked the look of him. Physically dominant, kind of in a mold, maybe a little bit less of a physical specimen like a Patrick Agyemang or a Daryl Dike, but I think he's in that mold as well, where he can just use his brute strength in a way to find the back of the net, and he's got a really good finishing touch as well. In contrast to a Julian Hall, who's a little bit of a more technical center forward, but also a player who can really put the ball in the back of the net when he's on form. I think that he can make that jump this year 100%, and we'll see if that's the case. But I'm really hopeful and optimistic about Julian Hall's prospects this season, especially because we're not necessarily relying on him, especially with a proven striker like Shupo ahead of him, and that's another player that he could learn from as well. So I think he's in for a good season, a breakout year at last for Julian Hall. I think could be on the cards for sure.
And that would be very welcome. Not only because it could open up the door for a big money signing for that young player because he's got so much potential. I don't expect him to be a career player for Red Bull New York. I don't think many people do. And 2026 could be the year that it really starts to take shape for him. And I think you make a great point about the way in which Sandro Schwartz used him, oftentimes as a deeper forward, as a one of those inverted wingers when they played with the dual tens, and he wasn't necessarily accustomed for that role, just not the type of playmaker. He's a guy who does his best damage with space in front of him, getting in behind. And I think we saw that best in that goal he scored against Monterrey in Leagues Cup, where he absolutely torched Sergio Ramos en route to a lovely goal, albeit in front of a crowd of nobody at TQL Stadium in Cincinnati, because, of course, Monterrey versus New York Red Bulls is played in Cincinnati. As for the defense, we've talked about, it looks like they're going to be looking for a signing. Diogo Bagui was the one player that it seemed like they were linked to, but apparently they only ever showed initial interest in him, and he ended up completing that long-awaited move to Tijuana in Liga MX. That looked like it was going to happen for him. We'll see what type of center back is brought in. Is it going to be a starting caliber player, a younger player? They've got those two U22 spaces up now. And I mentioned, I don't know if Dennis Yengor currently has space within the team. Do they completely uproot the U22 initiative roles and move on from him? I mean, there's nothing indicating that they're going to do that with Yengor. It just feels like to have multiple backup right backs who are international players just doesn't seem like the best path forward. So I'm speculating here, but just your thoughts on what type of player they should bring at center back. Like for me, Tim Parker at this point in his career, love him. Probably a depth center back. I don't think it bodes a lot of confidence if he is your premier starting center back. Justin Che, we know he can play as a center back. Dylan Nealis, same thing. Do you want to rely on those two guys as starting center backs moving forward? And Volodare, who started pretty consistently and did pretty well for Sporting Kansas City, they were willing to get rid of him at the end of last season, and that was a horrible SKC side. So I don't look at the center back and position and feel a lot of confidence from this team. And you mentioned this Red Bulls 2 team under Michael Bradley, for as great as they were and as good of a job he did to get them the trophy. There was a match they conceded 9 goals against Chicago. Their weakest position was by far in the center of defense. Is this something that we should be concerned about if they don't bring in a starting caliber center back for 2026?
Yeah, it's 100% a concern for me. Bearing in mind, right, our center back depth looks like this right now. 2 center backs who are, one center back who is a little bit past his best in Tim Parker. One center back who was on one of the worst MLS teams, perhaps of all time in SKC last year. We're probably only getting worse considering they have about 20 players on their roster. In Robert Volodare, who I think is a talented young center back with a pretty high ceiling, but point remains, he really isn't a proven, quality center back in this league with any season under his belt that is above average, let's just say. And then 2 players who are not accustomed to playing as a center back in a back 4. Dylan Nealis has done it in a back 3, but that's completely different. That's a completely different role. And Justin Che is another young defender who is really not accustomed to playing any position for an extended period of time. So there absolutely needs to be an addition at center back. And for me, I think it needs to be somebody with experience at a high level. I made an entire post actually about potential replacements who I thought the Red Bulls could bring in. I think, just to throw some names out there, a player like an Henry Chase playing at Salzburg right now is an American, which is kind of fitting or not an American, but a player who would not occupy an international roster slot. He actually represents Japan internationally, but I think a player of that mold is something that the Red Bulls are probably looking for in the center back position, because I think that suits what they've been looking for in terms of recruitment all window long, which is players who are either who either play in MLS, are born in America, or are just outright American. So I think in that regard, a player like an Henry Chase or like a Josh Winder playing over at Benfica, who I also identified as a potential option. Players like that who are not going to occupy an international roster spot, who are young but are also proven at a pretty decent level, whether that be in MLS or whether that be in Europe. I think that should be what Julian de Guzman is targeting realistically so that they are ready for match day one, or at best, early into the season.
Yeah, the longer it takes to bring in that type of player, I think the worse the team is off. Because, I mean, we saw it last year in MLS. They had more or less the same amount of points that they did in 2024, and it was enough to sneak into the playoffs, and it was enough to get to MLS Cup. It wasn't enough in 2025. And I think just looking around the league, not just in the East, but in the West, teams are loading up in a way that I don't think we've seen before. Like the Houston Dynamo, for example, have spent $10 million this offseason. And, it's a real make or break year for them if they don't succeed. But for the Red Bulls, we like a lot of what Julian de Guzman's done. But you look around the Eastern Conference, and are they going to be better than an Orlando? Are they going to be better than a Columbus? Are they going to be better than a New York City? I think New England has taken steps to be a real challenger for a playoff spot. Atlanta just brought back Tata Martino. And, I think every offseason people say Atlanta United is going to be great this year, but they might be great this year. So it's a really, really tricky situation to be in when you don't have your squad fully prepared. We've seen in MLS in years past that a midseason acquisition can change everything. We saw it in 2024 when Forsberg came back from injury, how that transformed the Red Bulls into a playoff caliber team. But the longer they spend looking for that right center back to fill out this room, I think it's going to be a problem potentially. And I think that's kind of what did their downfall in that preseason match against Dallas, where, according to the people that saw the full game, the Red Bulls' pressure was good. They had the most of the possession. Dallas were playing against the ball. I heard Ruvalcaba was doing well before his red card, taking players on 1v1. But can they afford to go through a portion of that season without a strong enough defense? I don't know. I really don't know. And when we talk about the thinness in midfield and the striker position as well, that there's a few question marks on this roster that need to be answered sooner rather than later. But you can't say that Julian de Guzman has sat on his hands. You can't say that Michael Bradley, hasn't had his imprint on the team. You heard from the players; they all seem to be made very clear about what their role is. De Guzman has, sent out 11 players and has brought in 7 in just this offseason alone, including the players that they signed at the end of last season. I believe that's 9 players now. So, there's a whole lot going on. So you can't say that. But I think that gives us a good window into looking at what the 2026 season is going to look like. I'm going to put you on the spot, Zach. I did this last week with Anthony Merced of AGM Sports FC. Check that episode out if you haven't yet, folks. But I asked him to give me a number in the table where you think the Red Bulls will land come the end of the 2026 MLS season. It is a really hard thing to posture right now, just because there's so much time, so many things could happen. We don't know if we have the full squad in front of us yet, but I do think it's really, really tight in the Eastern Conference. So go ahead, give me a number, or you can give me a range if you feel like there's a range, because I think it's a big, big range considering the upside and the downfall for this Red Bulls team in 2026. What do you got, Zach?
Yeah, to be honest, I have not looked at a full-on MLS prediction for either conference yet, so this is definitely putting me on the spot. But for the Red Bulls, I would say if they bring in a center back, 7th in the East is my call. If they don't bring in a center back, I think they're teetering on that play-in line is my call. So 7th if they do, 9th if they don't is my prediction.
I think that's perfectly fair. I said last week that I think their ceiling is 6th, maybe 5th, if everything goes right. And, Ruvalcaba has 10 assists and Cade Cowell's got double-digit goals. Those are big ifs, but, the quality in this team is there. The vision for Michael Bradley, we can all see it. They're building towards something special. It's going to be a matter of, can they implement it in the right ways? And I think the biggest hurdle is their weakness in defense going into 2026. I think they could finish as low as 12th or 13th if things go really poorly. I'm looking at Major League Soccer. Like, even the lowest teams from last season have made strides. I do think Montreal are going to struggle again. I think Toronto are going to make a jump. I don't know if they'll be a playoff team, but they've improved. If they can get Josh Sargent up top, that'll be a big money move. It looks like each day it's less likely, but still very, very possible. That would be a great signing. I think he would score loads of goals in MLS, and they would become a contender for a playoff spot. I think DC United's done great work, bringing in Ty Baribo, bringing in Sean Nealis, bringing in Sean Johnson as well, who was quietly one of the better goalkeepers in the Eastern Conference last year. So they're not going to go away quietly. I mentioned Atlanta. I mentioned New England. And those are just the teams that didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Then all the teams that did. I think New York City would finish the season very strongly, and their offseason, has given me reason to believe that they're going to be just as good. Inter Miami are a juggernaut. They are favorites to win the CONCACAF Champions Cup. They are favorites to win MLS Cup. I think they could win the Supporter Shield. Cincinnati, Nashville made a big increase. Charlotte, if they can stay healthy all season long, like I could go on and on. I look at the rest of the Eastern Conference and I feel a little bit less confident that this Red Bull team can do well. So I'm going to say, as of now, they're going to finish ninth and they're going to be the final team to make the playoffs. And I hope I'm wrong and I hope they do better than that. But I could also see a scenario in which they do even worse and finish maybe as low as 12th or 13th. And the fact that it's, so this many question marks, Zach, is why we love Major League Soccer. It's why, you can look at the Premier League any given year, and I could have told you that the two teams fighting for the title were going to be Arsenal and Manchester City. We'll see how that finishes out because it's going to be a fun race to the end. But as far as Major League Soccer goes, there's really only one team in the Eastern Conference that really stands out above the rest, and that's, of course, Messi's Inter Miami. And we'll see if they can go back-to-back as MLS Cup champions. We'll see what they can do in CONCACAF play. But, yeah, I'd love to see what moves the Red Bulls can make before the season starts. But for now, they're in a big range in terms of teams that aren't great but are still pretty good in that Eastern Conference. So that brings us just about to the end of this episode of Empire Soccer Report. Zach Feldman, I want to thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you to chat with. Let folks know where they can find you and what to expect from your content moving forward.
Yep. You can find me either at RBNY Season on X. I'm trying to post frequently on that account, but not really doing that much. You can also find me at _ZJF_ on X as well with my personal account. And you can find me on Instagram over at RBNY Season. And of course, you can listen to the most recent episode and all the episodes of the Unfiltered podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, I'm hoping to continue to improve my my content for 2026. I've got help on the audio side finally for Unfiltered. I've got a new guitar riff as well for that podcast.
I was gonna say, is that you playing the guitar in that?
No, that's actually my friend who's also helping me on the audio side. So that was kind of a last minute decision in editing, but I decided to add it in. But yeah, so we've got a lot of new stuff coming for Unfiltered in 2026, a new co-host. But yeah, looking forward to 2026. Hopefully I can join you again soon, and you can join me again soon on the Unfiltered podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, would love to. I'm going to have Zach's socials, RBNY Season, the Unfiltered podcast. That'll all be linked in the description on YouTube. And if you're listening on whatever platform for the podcast, I'll have that link there as well. Zach, thank you again for coming on. Red Bull New York's got 2 more preseason matches left, and then before we know it, it's going to be MLS season 2026 kicking off. They're going to start it on the road on Saturday, February the 21st against Orlando City. For Zach Feldman, I've been James Birle. This has been Empire Soccer Report. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you guys next time.